The silence before the stormed interview studio was quiet, but not in a normal way. It was the kind of silence that wrapped around the room like a secret waiting to be revealed. Cameras were rolling, lights were bright, and Keanu Reeves sat calmly in his chair, wearing that familiar gentle smile. The host, a well-known journalist, had prepared a list of questions about his new film, his career, his legacy. Everything was supposed to follow the script, but deep down, Keanu felt a storm brewing. Something inside him was stirring, a weight he had carried for years that he had never spoken about publicly. He had learned to live with silence, to let people assume, to let the world think they knew the whole story. But today, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, something felt different. Today wasn't going to follow the plan. The interview began in the usual way. The host asked about his new project, about the intense training he did for the role, about the emotional challenges of portraying such a complex character. Keanu answered politely, thoughtfully, as he always did. But then the conversation shifted, gently, almost innocently, toward his personal life. "You've always been very private," the host said with a smile. "But people are curious. After so many years in Hollywood, is there anyone who's truly had a deep impact on you? Someone who changed you?" It was a question Keanu had been asked before, and usually, he gave a safe answer. He would talk about his late parents, or about a director who inspired him, or about the fans who had supported him. But this time, his breath caught slightly. He paused. The host noticed. "Did I touch a nerve?" she asked, half-joking. Keanu leaned back in his chair and looked down for a moment, his hands clasped loosely. When he lifted his eyes again, there was something different in them, a softness, a sadness, and a depth that the cameras had never captured before. "There's someone," he said quietly. "The studio went silent. Someone who doesn't even know how much she's shaped the way I see the world. Someone who made me believe in kindness again." The host leaned forward. "Can you tell us who?" Keanu took a deep breath. Then, in a move that no one expected, he removed his earpiece, set it gently on the table, and said, "Before I answer that, I need a moment." And then, he stopped the interview. The producers behind the cameras exchanged confused glances. The host froze. Stopping an interview midway was almost unheard of, especially for someone as composed and media-savvy as Keanu Reeves. But he wasn't trying to create drama. This wasn't a stunt. There was something real happening. "You don't have to talk about it if it's too personal," the host offered softly. "No," Keanu said, shaking his head. "I think it's time." He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice grew quieter, more vulnerable. "Her name is Sandra Bullock." The words hung in the air like a confession. "We worked together many years ago." People saw to actors, to co-stars, maybe even to friends. But what they didn't see was how deeply she changed the way I view people. How her kindness, her strength, her humor, all of it left an imprint on me. He smiled faintly, his eyes distant, as if he was looking back through time. "We were both younger then. We didn't really talk about feelings. We were focused on our work, on building our careers. But even without saying much, I always felt something. A connection, a respect, maybe even something more." The host's voice was gentle now. "Did she know?" Keanu shook his head. "I don't think she ever did. And maybe that's on me. Maybe I was too scared to say it out loud. Maybe I didn't want to risk the friendship we had. But every time I see her, or even hear her name, I remember how she made me feel, like I wasn't just an actor or a public figure, but a human being who was seen and understood. There was no script anymore, no rehearsed lines. It was just raw truth, spilling out in front of millions of viewers who would soon see this interview. But the story wasn't simple. It never had been, because behind that respect and admiration was something deeper, something that had been buried for decades. There were moments they shared off camera that the world never knew about. Conversations in quiet corners, unspoken words and lingering glances, laughter that felt like home. And there were regrets too. Choices made, chances missed, timing that never aligned. Life had taken them down different paths. But fate, in a strange and unpredictable way, always seemed to pull them back into each other's orbit. "There was a moment," Keanu continued, "that I still think about. We were sitting together between takes, and she was talking about her dreams. Not about fame or awards, but about love, about finding someone who truly sees her. And I remember thinking I could be that person, but I didn't say it. I stayed silent." His voice trembled slightly, and that silence is something I've carried with me. The host didn't speak. She didn't need to. The story was unfolding on its own, and it was more powerful than any question she could ask. "I don't know what she thinks of me now," Keanu said softly. "But if there's one thing I wish I could tell her, it's that she changed my life. Not with grand gestures, but with small moments of grace. With the way she treats people, the way she listens, the way she makes the world feel a little kinder just by being in it." There was a long pause. The cameras were still rolling, but the interview had become something else, something deeper than entertainment. And then Keanu said something that no one in the room would ever forget. "If I could go back," he whispered, "I wouldn't stay silent." It was a simple sentence, but it carried the weight of decades, of feelings left unspoken, of chances not taken, up to lives that might have been different if only one moment had gone another way. And as he sat there, the world watched a man known for his humility and strength show something even rarer: vulnerability. But what Keanu didn't know was that this interview, this moment of honesty, was about to set off a chain of events that would change everything. Because somewhere, far from that studio, Sandra Bullock would see these words. And when she did, the past they had both buried would come rushing back in ways neither of them expected. This wasn't just a story about friendship or admiration anymore. It was the beginning of something much deeper, something that had been waiting, quietly, for decades to finally find its voice. Asterisk echoes from the past when the interview ended. The room was still heavy with emotion. The crew moved around quietly, unsure of what to say or how to act after what they had just witnessed. Keanu remained seated long after the cameras stopped rolling. His hands were clasped together, and he stared at the floor with a distant look in his eyes. He had said it. The words he had buried for years had finally escaped. It was terrifying, yet strangely freeing. Part of him wondered if he had gone too far, if speaking so openly about Sandra would create chaos in the media. But a deeper part of him didn't care anymore. Honesty had cost him nothing, and yet it had given him peace, something he had not felt in a very long time. Within hours, the clip spread across the internet. Journalists replayed the footage over and over, dissecting every word, every pause, every glance. Fans flooded social media with theories and hopes. Some said it was a confession of love. Others believed it was just a tribute to a lifelong friend. But one thing was clear. Keanu's words had touched millions. And among those millions was Sandra Bullock. She was in her kitchen when her phone started buzzing relentlessly. Friends, colleagues, even her agent had sent her the same link. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was just another interview or some clickbait headline. But when her closest friend texted, "You need to see this," something inside her shifted. Sandra sat down at her kitchen table, pressed play, and watched the moment Keanu removed his earpiece. Her heart started to race. As he spoke, her eyes welled up. By the time he said, "If I could go back, I wouldn't stay silent," a single tear slipped down her cheek. She leaned back in her chair, stunned. Memories flooded in, of long days on set filled with laughter and late-night conversations that drifted into personal dreams. She remembered the comfort she always felt around him, how he understood her in a way few people ever did, and she remembered the silence too, the heavy, unspoken words that always lingered between them. They had both been too careful, too afraid of ruining something beautiful, too busy chasing careers and protecting their hearts. But now, decades later, those words had finally been spoken. She replayed the interview twice, 3 times, each time catching something new, a flicker in his eyes, the tremble in his voice, the vulnerability that he rarely showed to anyone. And with every replay, the question grew louder in her mind. Was it too late? 3 days later, they saw each other again. It wasn't planned. Keanu had been invited to a charity gala in Los Angeles, a small, elegant event hosted to support children's literacy programs. Sandra had been invited too. When she saw his name on the guest list, she hesitated. But curiosity and something deeper, a longing she had suppressed for too long, made her accept. The night was warm, and the city skyline shimmered outside the glass windows of the ballroom. Keanu arrived early, as he always did, and kept mostly to himself, greeting old friends and taking photos with fans. He hadn't expected to see her. He thought perhaps the interview had been too much, that she would want distance. But then, just as he was turning toward the refreshment table, he heard a familiar laugh. It was soft, melodic, and instantly recognizable. He turned, and there she was. Sandra stood by the entrance, wearing a simple black dress. her hair cascading gently over her shoulders. Their eyes met across the room, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both caught in the gravity of everything they had left unsaid. Finally, she smiled, a small, hesitant smile, and started walking toward him. "Hi," she said softly when she reached him. "Hi," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, the kind that carries years of history. "I saw the interview," she said. "I figured you might." "You surprised me. I surprised myself." They both laughed quietly, and the tension softened just a little. But beneath the surface, there was still so much unsaid. "You meant every word?" she asked. Keanu looked into her eyes, really looked, and nodded. "Every single one." Silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, meaningful. "You know," she said after a moment, "there were times I wanted to say something to, but I thought, maybe it was just me." His breath caught slightly. It wasn't, and in that instant, something shifted. For the first time in decades, they weren't hiding behind jokes or professionalism or excuses. They were just a people, stripped of all pretense, speaking the truth. They spent the rest of the evening talking, not about fame or films, but about life, about regrets, about choices, about all the little moments that had shaped them. They laughed about old memories and shared stories they had never told each other before, and yet, beneath the laughter, there was a question hanging in the air. It hovered between every glance, every smile. What now? As the night came to an end, Sandra stepped closer. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. When you said you wouldn't stay silent, what would you say?" Keanu hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand, something he had wanted to do for years, but never dared. "I'd say that I never stopped caring," he whispered, "that no matter how much time has passed, no matter how different our lives became, a part of me always hoped we'd find our way back." Her eyes softened. "And what if we did?" Keanu didn't answer. He didn't need to. The way he looked at her said everything. For the first time, they walked out of a room together, not as co-stars, not as old friends, but as the people finally ready to explore the possibility they had both been too afraid to chase. But just as the night seemed perfect, reality came crashing in, because not everyone was ready to see them together again. And in the shadows of that ballroom, a figure watched them leave, a figure from their past with secrets that could change everything they thought they knew about each other. The past was not done with them yet. The ghost they never expected. Morning after the gala felt different. Sunlight spilled gently into Keanu's kitchen, but there was a storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sandra's smile, heard her voice, and replayed every word they shared. It felt surreal. After decades of silence, they were finally talking about the things that had always been buried beneath the surface. But underneath the warmth of that night, there was also a quiet unease he couldn't shake. It was as if something had shifted in the universe, something fragile and unfinished. And he was right. Across town, Sandra sat in her living room, still wearing the same bracelet she'd worn to the gala. She couldn't stop smiling. After all these years, they had finally spoken their truth. She felt lighter, freer, but there was also fear. The kind that comes when you realize that something real and precious might finally be within reach. She made coffee, sat by the window, and thought about all the times they could have been together, but weren't. Maybe the timing had been wrong. Maybe they weren't ready. But now, it felt different. They were older, wiser, more honest with themselves. And yet, as she scrolled through her phone, the smile slowly faded. Her notifications were exploding. Articles, gossip blogs, and fan theories were everywhere. The world had seen them at the gala. Headlines screamed, "Are Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock finally together?" Hollywood's most beloved duo, second chance at love. Keanu's confession sparks decades-old rumor, and in the middle of all the noise, one message stood out. A private one. It was from a name she hadn't seen in over 20 years. "We need to talk. It's about him, and about the past you both forgot." Her heart skipped. She stared at the message, reading it over and over. It was from Laura, an old friend from the early days of her career. They had been close once, but something had happened between them, something that ended their friendship abruptly. Laura had disappeared from her life, and Sandra had never known why. Until now. That evening, they met again. This time, not at a gala or a studio, but at a small, hidden cafe they used to visit during their first film together. It was quiet, away from the flashing cameras and whispers. Keanu was already there, waiting. He stood as soon as she walked in. "Hey," he said softly, "hey." They hugged, longer than they had before, and sat down by the window. For a while, they didn't talk. They just looked at each other, as if trying to memorize the reality of this new chapter they had stepped into. "It's strange," Sandra said finally. "How easy it is to talk to you after all this time. It's like nothing's changed," Keanu replied. "But everything has." They smiled, and for a moment, everything felt simple. But then Sandra took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, pulling her phone from her bag. "I got a message today from someone I haven't heard from in decades." Keanu's brow furrowed. "Who?" "Laura." The name seemed to pull him back in time. He remembered Laura, the vibrant assistant on set, always around, always watching. She had been close to Sandra then, almost like a sister. And then, suddenly, she was gone. "What did she say?" "That there's something we both forgot. Something about the past." Keanu frowned. "Forgot? What does that even mean?" "I don't know," Sandra admitted. "But she wants to meet." Keanu leaned back, thinking, "Do you trust her?" "I did. Once." They sat in silence for a moment. The idea that someone from decades ago could hold a secret about them was unsettling. But curiosity, and maybe a bit of fear, pushed them forward. "Then we should meet her," Keanu said finally. 2 days later, they met Laura in a quiet park in Pasadena. She looked older, tired, and a little nervous. But her eyes, sharp and knowing, hadn't changed at all. "It's been a long time," she said softly. "Too long," Sandra replied, her voice steady. Laura's gaze shifted to Keanu. "You probably don't even remember half of it." "But I do." "Remember what?" he asked. "The night everything changed." Silence. Birds chirped in the distance. Sandra's heart was pounding. "You were closer than anyone realized," Laura continued. "Everyone saw the chemistry on screen. But off screen, there was something real. Something you were both too afraid to admit. And it scared people." "It scared them?" "Them?" Keanu asked. "The studio," Laura said, her voice dropping. "They thought it would ruin the movie, ruin your careers. So they stepped in. They did everything they could to keep you apart. Changed schedules, manipulated press stories. They even fed you lies about each other." Keanu's jaw tightened. "Lies?" "Keanu," Laura said, turning to him, "do you remember the phone call you got before the premiere? The one that made you cancel dinner with her?" He nodded slowly. "They said she didn't want to see me." "And Sandra," Laura continued, "do you remember the note they showed you? The one they claimed was from him, saying he wasn't interested in anything beyond friendship." Sandra's breath caught. "I do. I still remember every word." Laura sighed. "They forged it. Both of them. They made sure you'd stay apart because they were scared of what would happen if you fell for each other. They wanted control, and they knew that together you'd be unstoppable." The world seemed to tilt. Neither Keanu nor Sandra spoke. They just stared at each other, stunned. "I tried to tell you," Laura whispered, "but they fired me before I could. And by the time I tracked you down, it was too late. You'd both moved on." Sandra's hands trembled. Decades of confusion, of unanswered questions, suddenly made sense. The missed calls, the cold distance that followed the premiere, the quiet heartbreak neither of them had ever talked about. "All this time," Keanu whispered, his voice breaking, "I thought you didn't feel the same, and I thought you didn't care." Sandra said, tears filling her eyes. They stared at each other, years of regret and misunderstanding hanging between them. And then, in the middle of that park, Keanu reached for her hand. "We lost so much time," he whispered. "We did," she breathed. "But maybe we don't have to lose any more." The wind rustled through the trees as if the universe itself was sighing with relief. They were finally seeing the truth, not the version that had been fed to them, but the real story that had been stolen from them. But as they stood there, hand in hand, Laura's final words hung heavy in the air. "And there's something else," she said. "Something neither of you know. Something that could change everything again." Their hearts skipped. "What do you mean?" Keanu asked. But Laura only looked at them, her expression unreadable. "You'll find out soon," she whispered. "And when you do, nothing will ever be the same." The truth beneath the surface's drive back from the park was quiet. Neither Keanu nor Sandra spoke. They didn't need to. The revelations from Laura's confession echoed in both of their minds. playing over and over like a film they had watched too many times. Everything they thought they knew, every assumption, every silent regret, was built on lies. For years, they believed they had chosen not to be together. But in reality, that choice had been taken from them. Keanu gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, the weight of wasted years pressing down on him. "How many times," he said finally, "did we pass each other and pretend it didn't matter?" "Too many," Sandra whispered, staring out the window. "I always told myself you were happier without me, and maybe that was easier to believe than the truth, and I thought you didn't care," he murmured. "I convinced myself it was one-sided. I even tried to forget. Did you?" Keanu glanced at her, his eyes soft and honest. "Not for a second." Sandra's chest tightened. That simple sentence held a lifetime of longing. She reached out and gently placed her hand over his. It was warm, steady, familiar in a way that felt like coming home. "We can't change the past," she said softly. "But maybe we can change what happens next." Keanu nodded. Maybe we can. But both of them knew Laura's final words were still lingering in the air. Something else. Something that could change everything again. 2 days later, Laura called. "We need to meet," she said urgently. "There's more you need to know." They agreed to meet her at a quiet bookstore cafe on the west side of the city, a place where the press wouldn't find them. The rain was falling lightly when they arrived, the kind of rain that makes the world feel slower and more thoughtful. Laura was already there, sitting at a corner table with a small folder in front of her. She looked nervous, as if the truth she carried was heavier than she could handle. "Thank you for coming," she said as they sat down. "Just tell us," Keanu said gently. "No more waiting." "What is it?" Laura took a deep breath and opened the folder. Inside were old photographs, letters, and production notes from the early days of their first film. Some of the documents were familiar, schedules, casting memos, but others were not. "After they split you two apart," she began, "they did more than just sabotage your connection. They built an entire narrative around you, one they controlled. But there's one detail they buried deeper than anything else." She slid a photograph across the table. It was of a dinner party, one that neither of them remembered attending. The date on the back was from the week they were supposed to have met privately, before the premiere. "What is this?" Sandra asked. "Look closer," Laura said. Sandra studied the photo and then froze. In the background, there was a woman standing near Keanu. She was smiling, leaning close and holding his arm. "Who is that?" "That," Laura said carefully, "is Victoria Harris. She was the studio's public relations strategist. And she wasn't just managing press. She was assigned to him." Keanu frowned. "Assigned? They didn't just want you apart," Laura explained. "They wanted to make sure the public believed you never had anything. Victoria was told to be seen with you, to create a false narrative. They planted rumors that you were dating. They did the same with Sandra, pairing her name with a co-star from another film." Sandra felt her stomach twist. "So every headline, every article that said we were just friends, was part of the plan," Laura said. But then she hesitated, and her next words landed like a punch to the chest. "And Victoria didn't stop after the film. She kept certain information from you, Keanu. Information about someone who tried to reach you years later." "Who?" "Me," Sandra whispered, her voice barely audible. Keanu turned to her, confusion flashing across his face. "What do you mean? Do you remember the charity event in Paris?" she asked. "The one where you never showed up?" He nodded slowly. "I was told you canceled." "I didn't," she said, her voice trembling. "I was there. I waited for hours." Keanu's breath caught. "They told me you didn't want to see me, and I thought you didn't care enough to come." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was like watching the pieces of a puzzle fall into place. Every misunderstanding, every mischance, every heartbreak suddenly made sense. "They stole decades from us," Keanu whispered. "Yes," Sandra said, tears welling up. "But they can't steal what's still left." Keanu reached across the table and took her hand again, not tentatively this time, but with certainty. "I don't want to waste another day," he said. "Not one." Sandra nodded. "Neither do I." That night, for the first time in over 20 years, they sat together in Keanu's living room, surrounded by quiet and warmth. The city lights glowed softly through the window, and the rain tapped gently against the glass. They talked for hours, about the past, about the choices they never made, about the lives they had lived apart, and somewhere between laughter and tears, they found a strange peace. But just as the night was settling into something beautiful, Keanu's phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered, and a woman's voice, calm, cold, and deliberate, spoke on the other end. Double quotes, Reeves, she said, "This is Victoria Harris. I think it's time we talked. Because if you continue down this path, the truth about what really happened will destroy both of you." The line went dead. Keanu stared at the phone, his heart racing. "Who was it?" Sandra asked. He swallowed hard. "Victoria." What did she say? He looked at her, and the weight of the words he was about to speak made his chest tighten. She said, "There's a truth we haven't heard yet, and if we find it, everything could fall apart." They exchanged a long, silent look. The past had already rewritten itself once, but now, it seemed, there was still another layer, one that could unravel everything they had just begun to rebuild. And this time, the truth might not set them free. It might destroy them. The storm behind the curtains next few days felt like walking on thin glass. Keanu and Sandra tried to carry on as if everything was normal: lunches, quiet walks, late-night talks, but Victoria's phone call hung over them like a dark cloud. Neither of them said it out loud, but they were both thinking the same thing. What could she possibly know that would destroy everything? Keanu replayed the conversation in his mind again and again. Victoria's voice hadn't sounded angry or vengeful. It had sounded confident, certain, as if she held a card neither of them even knew existed. "Maybe she's bluffing," Sandra suggested one night, though she didn't sound convinced. "Maybe," Keanu said, "but she's the one who orchestrated everything back then. If anyone has secrets, it's her." They both knew they couldn't just ignore it. Whatever Victoria was hiding, it was part of their story, a piece of the puzzle they needed to understand if they were ever going to move forward. Without doubts or shadows, so they made a decision. They would meet her. The meeting was set in a discreet private room at a downtown hotel. Victoria's choice. She arrived exactly on time, dressed immaculately as always, her expression calm and unreadable. "It's been a long time," she said with a faint smile as she sat across from them. "Not long enough," Keanu replied. Victoria sighed. "I understand why you're angry, but before you decide that I'm the villain in your story, you should know the full picture." "You lied to us," Sandra said, her voice sharp. "You manipulated us, separated us, and made sure we stayed apart." "Why? Because I was told to," Victoria said simply. "I was following orders." "Orders from who?" Keanu demanded. Victoria's eyes met his, steady and cold. "From the studio, from executives, from investors. You two together were a threat, not because you weren't good for each other, but because you were the powerful. They wanted control, and they knew if you joined forces, you'd have more influence than they could manage. So they lied to us," Sandra said bitterly. "And you went along with it." "I did," Victoria admitted, "and I regret it. But there's more you need to understand, something I never told anyone." She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn folder. Inside were documents, contracts, letters, even photos. "What's this?" Keanu asked, flipping through them. "Proof," Victoria said quietly. "Proof that it wasn't just the studio. There was another person involved, someone much closer to both of you." Sandra frowned. "Who?" Victoria hesitated. "Someone you trusted, someone who didn't want you together." Her hands trembled slightly as she slid the final page across the table, a confidential memo. "Dated years ago." Keanu's single quotes as heart stopped when he saw the name sign at the bottom. It was his manager, Alex Rosen. The world tilted. Alex had been more than a manager. He had been a mentor, a guide, even a friend. Keanu had trusted him with everything, believed he had his best interest at heart. And yet, here was proof that Alex had played a role in keeping him and Sandra apart. "No," Keanu whispered. "This can't be real." "It is," Victoria said. "Alex was one of the key voices who argued that your careers would suffer if you were seen as a couple. He convinced them to move forward with a plan. He even signed off on several of the fake narratives." Sandra's stomach churned. "And all this time, we blamed ourselves." "That was the point," Victoria said. "If you thought it was your fault, you'd never question what really happened." Keanu stared at the papers in silence, his mind racing through decades of memories, conversations with Alex, advice he'd followed without question, moments when things hadn't added up, but he brushed them aside. It all made sense now. "Why are you telling us this?" he asked finally. Victoria sighed. "Because I'm done protecting them, and because there's something else you need to know, something that even Alex never told you." She looked directly at Sandra. "He didn't just sabotage your relationship. He sabotaged your future. Sandra's heart started pounding. What do you mean? Victoria hesitated, then said, after the premiere, you reached out. You wrote a letter. Yes, Sandra said slowly. I never got a reply. You never got a reply, Victoria said, because he intercepted it. He kept it from Keanu, and he kept his reply from you. Sandra's eyes widened. He wrote back. Keanu looked stunned. I did. You did, Victoria said. A handwritten letter. It was short, but it was honest. And if either of you had read what the other wrote, things would have been very different. The silence that followed was heavy. Sandra's hands trembled as she covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Keanu's chest felt tight, as if the weight of 2 decades was pressing down on him all at once. Do you have them? He asked finally. Victoria nodded. Yes, I kept copies. I thought one day, maybe you'd need them. She pulled the folded envelopes from her bag and set them gently on the table. They looked old, fragile, as if they'd been waiting their entire lives to be read. Keanu stared at the one with Sandra's handwriting. Sandra stared at the one with his. Neither of them reached for them right away, because they both knew, once they read those words, nothing would ever be the same. They didn't open them at the hotel. They waited until later, sitting side by side on the balcony of Keanu's home, the city lights flickering below them. The night was quiet except for the hum of distant traffic. You first, Sandra whispered. Keanu unfolded the letter carefully. Her handwriting was delicate, familiar. His eyes scanned the words, and his breath caught. I don't know why you walked away, but I need you to know I never stopped believing in what we shared. Even if we never speak again, a part of my heart will always belong to you. If there's even the smallest chance you feel the same, meet me at the cafe next Friday at 7. His hands shook. He remembered that Friday. He remembered waiting at home, telling himself she didn't care. I was home that night. He whispered. I was there. I just didn't know. Then it was her turn. She opened his letter, 3 simple lines that shattered her heart. I wish I had the courage to tell you how I feel. I'm not ready to give up on us. If you still believe we have a chance, I'll be there whenever you're ready. Tears streamed down her face. You were ready. I always was, Keanu said softly. They sat in silence, tears and laughter mixing in the night air. It was heartbreaking to know they had both been willing, both been waiting, and still lost each other. But it was also healing, because for the first time, they understood the truth. We were never the problem, Sandra whispered. No, Keanu said, taking her hand gently. But maybe now, we can finally be the solution. And just as hope began to bloom again, Keanu's phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. You think you know the whole story. You don't. If you want the truth, come to the address below. Alone. Attached was a location pin. And underneath it, one final line, because the real reason you were kept apart wasn't about business. It was about blood. Asterisk, the secret they never saw coming. Night was colder than usual. The city's glow felt distant and muted as Keanu stared at the mysterious message on his phone. Because the real reason you were kept apart wasn't about business. It was about blood. Those words repeated over and over in his head until they didn't sound real anymore. Blood. Not money, not power, not image. Blood. Who sent that? Sandra asked quietly, sitting beside him on the balcony. I don't know, Keanu murmured. There's no name, just this address. She leaned closer, reading the screen. It's on the outskirts of the city. Some kind of old estate. It could be a trap, he said, or it could be the truth, she whispered. They sat in silence for a long time. Everything they had uncovered so far, the studio's lies, Victoria's manipulation, Alex's betrayal, the stolen letters, all of it had been painful, but understandable. Human greed, control, fear. But blood was different. Blood meant family. Blood meant history. Blood meant something deeper. Finally, Keanu stood up. I'm going. Then I'm going with you, Sandra said immediately. He looked at her, at the woman who had been pulled out of his life, and now somehow found her way back into it. He wanted to protect her, to keep her from whatever darkness waited ahead. But he also knew this wasn't just his story. It was theirs, okay? He said softly. We go together. The estate was old and quiet, its walls covered in ivy and its windows glowing faintly in the night. It looked abandoned, but a single light burned in the upstairs study. They walked through the heavy wooden doors and into a room lined with books and old photographs. At the center of it all, sitting behind a massive oak desk, was a man neither of them recognized. Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock, he said with a faint smile. I've been expecting you. Who are you? Keanu asked. The man stood. My name is Thomas. I worked for your family, Mr. Reeves, many years ago. And before you ask, no, I am not your enemy. I am simply here to give you the truth that was hidden from both of you. What truth? Sandra asked cautiously. Thomas motioned for them to sit. You were kept apart, yes, because of the studio, because of money, because of power. But beneath all of that was something far more complicated, something deeply personal. It began long before either of you were born. He walked to a shelf, pulled down a worn leather folder, and laid it gently on the table. Inside were black and white photographs, people they didn't recognize, letters written in faded ink, and documents with both their family names on them. Your families, Thomas began, have been connected for over 50 years. Not as friends, but as enemies. Keanu frowned. Enemies? Yes, Thomas said. Your father and Sandra's grandfather were business partners once. They built a company together, a powerful media group that controlled half the entertainment industry. But greed tore them apart. Accusations, lawsuits, betrayals. By the time the dust settled, they hated each other so much they swore no member of either family would ever work together again. That's ancient history, Sandra said, shaking her head. Not to them, Thomas replied. When you two met, certain people in both families panicked. They saw history repeating itself. They saw the possibility of scandal, of secrets being exposed. So they intervened, quietly, ruthlessly, completely. And they made sure you would never discover the truth. Keanu leaned forward. What secrets? Thomas hesitated, then pulled out a final envelope, heavier and older than the rest. This, he said, is the real reason they wanted you apart. Keanu opened it slowly. Inside was a birth certificate. His breath caught when he read the name written under father. It wasn't the name he had grown up believing. This is wrong, he whispered. This isn't my father. It's correct, Thomas said gently. Your mother had a relationship before she married, a brief one, and the man she was involved with was, he paused, his eyes shifting to Sandra, your grandfather's eldest son. The room fell silent. Sandra's eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm saying, Thomas said carefully, that by blood, you to share a distant lineage, not close enough to make you family in any meaningful way, but close enough to terrify both sides. They feared the public would twist it, that it would ruin reputations, spark scandals, destroy legacies. So they buried it, and they buried you. Keanu's world tilted. He stood up and walked to the window, his chest heaving. All these years, all these lies. You're not siblings, Thomas said quickly. Not even cousins. The connection is distant, a tangled piece of family history from decades ago. But to powerful people with fragile reputations, it was enough to justify everything they did. Sandra's hands trembled. They stole our story because of this. They did, Thomas said softly. And they thought they were protecting you. But in truth, they were protecting themselves. The drive back was silent. The rain had returned, falling harder now, blurring the city lights. Neither of them spoke. The weight of what they had just learned was too heavy, too complex, too painful to process. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. So, everything that happened, all the lies, all the pain, it was all because of a feud between people who are probably not even alive anymore. Keanu nodded slowly. They built a wall around us before we even met, and we kept blaming ourselves for never climbing it. She looked at him. Does this change how you feel? He turned to her, tired, broken, but certain. Not even a little. Me neither. They pulled into his driveway and sat there for a long time, the rain pattering gently against the windshield. And then, slowly, Keanu reached across the console and took her hand. We've been robbed of so much, he whispered. Years, memories, chances. I don't want to lose one more second. Sandra's voice shook as she replied, then don't. And in that moment, after decades of silence, betrayal, lies, and stolen time, he kissed her. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic kiss. It was soft, trembling, almost fragile. But it carried the weight of everything they had endured and everything they still hoped for. When they finally pulled apart, there were tears in both their eyes. What now? She asked. Now, he said, we stopped letting the past define us. We stopped letting their lives write our story. We write it ourselves. And they did. Weeks later, they made their first public appearance together, not as co-stars, not as old friends, but as the people who had finally chosen each other after a lifetime of being kept apart. The world erupted with joy and curiosity, but for the first time, they didn't care. Their story wasn't about the past anymore. It was about the present and the future they would build together. And in a quiet interview months later, when asked why they had chosen this moment to come forward, Keanu smiled and said 6 words that silenced the room, because love deserves to speak at last. And Sandra, sitting beside him, smiled too, because after everything, it finally had.